And we can filter out whatever.
Whatever you need. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super easy. Like even this diatribe intro, we might even just keep this in. Yeah, we like to keep it pretty light. So, anyways, Carl Bergstrom, thank you so much for lending us your time. I know you're a busy man. We've been ships passing in the night of sorts, especially of late. So, first off, I appreciate you taking the time to have a chat.
Of course, my pleasure. I was excited when you asked me to come on.
Yeah. Now, for those unaware of Carl Bergstrom, his history in the industry, could you give us like just a brief background of kind of who you are, how you got here, what you do, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, I think I'm right around 11 years in the industry. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. I started in a private gym as a versatile strength coach. I kind of had, the 65-year-old dentist, the athlete development program, and I made my way through there while I was still doing my undergrad and my master's. Had a real big passion for sport. Uh, Over that next 9 or 10 years, I did 5 years with the Vancouver Whitecaps, which is the MLS. I did 2 or 3 years working with the women's national team for soccer. I had a year with the Canucks, NHL, pardon me, as a consultant. And then I was fortunate enough to get the job with the Golden State Warriors. So I was the head performance coach for 2 years, and then my last 2 years the director of performance. So my background is more so strength and conditioning, but I did kind of wear multiple hats around more of the sports science side and load management, return to play. But my heart is as a strength coach and as a movement coach, and there's lots of layers to that. And that was kind of over the last 10 years. And then now I've left the team setting, and I'm on the private sector working with Stephen Curry as his private director of performance to oversee his off season as well as involved in his in season work.
I'm trying to think of parts of the industry that you haven't touched in the strength role, and I think you hit for the cycle. Like I think you kind of have the royal flush when I think of the industry.
I will definitely say I mean, yeah, age. I've worked with 6-year-olds trying to just learn to have fun and play, and get in the weight room and get competent and moving. And I've worked with a 92-year-old who just wanted to not fall when she went up and down the stairs. So I've been all over the place.
What was that initial transition like out of the more public sector in a gym setting to a more conventional role at SNC?
Well, that's such a good question, and I personally think whether you want to work in sport or not, it's really important to work in the private sector and have a diverse clientele, because you learn as best as you can to try to manage the relationship, that person's health and wellness. You understand what works for one, and you're not trying to fall too much under a system, but more under principles. And eventually, when you do get your opportunity to go into a team or a system, it can be humbling because going from the private sector where you really do have a lot of control, you go into a team environment where you have to connect with athletes, staff, coaches. You have to recognize that some athletes may not value the strength and conditioning the way that you do, or they may not see it the way that you do. They're there to be a sportsman, not to be in the weight room. And so there are layers that you need to recognize in terms of buy-in from the private sector that doesn't always carry over to the team setting, and it takes time. And really, it deprioritizes or decentralizes the strength and conditioning side as the primary initiative, which is what you're doing when you're in the private sector, versus in the team sector where it's only one piece of a global component, which is travel, practice, games, family. There's so many different layers.
Now you've chose a few interesting sports on the strength side, maybe sports that aren't necessarily ubiquitous to strength and conditioning to begin with. How could you compare or maybe even contrast any differences or similarities between being a strength coach and the director of performance for pro soccer versus pro basketball? Are there any similarities? I just think of both of those sports as athletes that I've met that have been relatively contentious on the strength side, both I've heard say more disproportionately. No, I haven't worked with many, but every time I hear the word lifting weights makes me slow, I've disproportionately heard it from soccer players and hoopers.
Yes, you beat me to it. Yeah, I mean that is true. So first of all, when we were with the Whitecaps, I remember I'll be honest. Like my first year, I was there, making almost nothing, but I wanted to be around good people. And I wasn't the head at that point at all. But I was very close with the head person there, John Poley, who was the head of physical preparation, and then we had Rick Celebrini and Ben Sporer. We had an amazing group, but John he's like I think he's 43 years old right now. He's one of the fittest humans in the world. He's strong. He runs. He played borderline semi-professional soccer. But when I first came in and these guys didn't want to kind of get after it, I had this negative attitude. It's like how do they like these guys are soft. Like how do they not want to lift? And it took me a while to understand this soft side. And John Poley was the one who really helped me understand kind of the slow and steady approach with these guys. And I honestly, by the back end of our second or third year, our whole team was in the weight room, tarps off, having fun, yelling, lifting weights like 2, 3 days a week, no problem. But it just took much longer to get there. And yes, does that perception exist that, weights make you slow? Of course. On any given soccer team, you have people, you probably have 10 nations that are represented. I think of one year we had uh, a Uruguayan, a Costa Rican, a Brazilian, a player from Japan, American, Canadian, and so they all grow up in these different places, and they value the strength and conditioning side. Some a lot, some not as much, some not at all, and it's really our job to recognize the athlete where they are, meet them where they are, and then try to create relative improvements as we move forward. So I'm not really answering your question, but I think the statement of yeah, lifting weights makes me slow, and my attitude with it initially, and how it evolved over time was a big one. In basketball, I'll argue with anybody that the majority of basketball athletes are as versatile or as good of athletes as any in the world. They can jump. They're strong. They're really athletic. Their hand-eye is amazing. They can convert to a lot of sports, most of them, and often with those athletic qualities, it's not indifferent to not valuing the gym for more than injury prevention, right? And fundamentally, most of the people who are listening to this, yeah, the weight room is about strength and power, but the weight room is really about creating good habits, building up a really robust system that can move well, that has control, a system that can generate force, that can do everything under the sun that's required to function well in life, to complete what you want to complete, and obviously for athletes to help them perform and to be available. So again, I'm not really answering your question because I'm trying to think how to come full circle. Is although those two sports, the evolution in the weight room has been exponential over the last decade. They both come with a different, initial runway where it's like meet them where they are. And then obviously ice hockey is a different beast because ice hockey, rugby, football, they'll put their head through a wall for their team and for themselves. So that's more about pulling the athlete back and recognizing, hey, let's do something that is purposeful for you, not just do more and more and more and more and more. Where soccer, it's more recognizing, hey, where can we meet and let's chip away and add whatever we need to add. And basketball somewhere in between. In my
When you,
in my experience, of
I think
course.
I would take your experience to the bank, so we could pretty much state that as outright outright fact. When you transitioned to Golden State, I'm curious of like your initial thoughts. Obviously, it sounded like it would be an exciting move and an exciting time to be in an exciting organization. What were the first couple of thoughts running through your head when you got the nod from Golden State?
Well, I was so fucking nervous.
It's great.
Honestly,
That's
I was. It's just the honest truth. Listen, whether we get into this later, I'm a firm believer of mentorship and being around good people. Rick Celebrini is like my mentor, one of my good friends, one of the greatest humans in the world slash professionals. I was with him with the Whitecaps for 5 years. He's the one who actually brought me with him to Golden State, and we came in as a team, as a unit. And how I can't say that I would have had the same success without him. Well, I mean, he brought me in, and but to the point is when we came in, it was very much um, you know recognizing what the environment was instead of trying to come in and say this is what we know works. Let's do our way right away. It was bending, not breaking, trying to make sure we're providing value, but not coming in and trying to puff our chest up and say this is our system and this is what works. Because the reality is they had just won 3 championships. So, two Canadian cats coming in and trying to press reset it wasn't gonna fly. And there was a third of Dr. Jerry Ramajita. I don't know if you know Jerry. Jerry came down with us as well. So three guys from Vancouver.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Now, how would you describe the culture shift from the beginning of your tenure there to the end? Obviously, like, you're trying to get
Wow.
a read on the room. You're the new guys on the block. But I remember reading some ridiculous statistic, and I forget who the player is, and maybe you can help me out. And it was actually, I think it was about Rick specifically. I know Rick had a lot to do and was credited a lot with, I want to say it's Thompson's ACL reconstruction. But there was a player, and it was probably the most profound statistic. And I've called up on it. I've fairly recently, and talking to a couple of teams about the importance of good direction at that position, like having a cohesive relationship between the strength coach and the performance director. And it was a player who had, in seasons previous, had only played like 11 games, when then played under the tutelage of you and Rick 65 games, and then moved to another team and then played another like 12 games, 8
Yeah.
games, 6 games. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I do. I do. I mean, just I don't. There was an article on that.
Yeah, it was a tweet that was out on Twitter. So it's
Yeah.
in the public discourse, if that's the concern. But
Yeah.
I
No.
just
I know exactly what. I mean, that's honest to God. Like, the man's a wizard, right? Like, so he's a physiotherapist by trade, okay, but he's a profession. He's a former professional athlete. He played for our national team in soccer. He understands performance as well as he understands the body, right? So often in our realm, we have our strength coaches who tend to believe that we have control of our body and we have a certain biases, and that's really important. And then you have the far right, which might be a little bit more focused on, if you want, recovery and other layers. And the reality is we are all under one spectrum. Like, a strength coach needs to be able to recognize and understand the perspective of a chiro, of a physio, of a family doctor, of anybody. There's value from there. And on the opposite end, where I think some organizations may struggle, is they have somebody who comes in as a performance director, or global VP of health and performance, and they have very much a medical lens, and they don't perhaps have enough of an understanding of the strength and conditioning, the performance side, that's required for return to play, or to performance optimization. They're more very health lens focused, and so you create it can, not on purpose, but it can lend to a bit of a disjointed approach, a very siloed approach. And so coming back to Rick, is he is a former professional athlete who understands performance more than almost any human I've ever met. He understands the connection between humans. He understands the value of team and integration, but he's also one of the best physios in the world. So, he can talk to any doctor. He can talk to anybody along that spectrum, and have a good enough understanding and a good enough connection with that human to create cohesiveness, to move forward, to have a plan, to be successful.
How important was that in the initial thought process? It sounded quite collaborative, of like, hey, we're going to come down and deliberately try and read the room, like you said, don't puff the chest out. Because I think there's probably nothing more difficult or more daunting or more nerve-wracking than walking into an organization that's winning. Walking into an organization that's tanking, is that slight work. Worst case, you're a status quo and they're still bad. But and I was in the Bay Area around the time that you guys were there, and the amount of pressure in the Bay Area sports world around Golden State, and maintained still today, when when you got there, when did the frame shift? When did you start to take the reins of the culture? How long did that take with the team you guys had to be like, okay, we got him. We got him. Now we can start to create this cohesive vision and start acting upon the way we see best fit.
That's a hell of a question. So I'm not going to give you the political question or the political answer, but it's true. So first and foremost, the culture there, if you look at the leadership in terms of the players, is world class. So you have, of course, Stephen Curry. When I first came in, the Stephen Curry, Andre Iguodala, Sean Livingston, all like vets have been around. Draymond, Clay, even
Jeez.
KD. Like that was my first year, right? So you have a bunch of adults in the room where that's rare in sport, right? And they're still the best players. They still train the hardest. Like so, they're setting a standard. Then you have Bob Myers and Coach Kerr, who Coach Kerr is so empathetic and his emotional IQ is through the roof. Like he understands how to connect with who's there. So that's my first piece of like that is culture, first and foremost. I will not. I don't think I'll say that there was a point where our group came and said, okay, now we've pushed those pieces. I think we came in and we tried to understand what defines the culture and how we can fall within the culture versus redefining it. And really, it was a do no harm. Obviously, make sure we're doing our job well, consistently, and in an uncompromised way. We try, even though I can be emotional, I think we try to live by the, never get too high, never get too low, be consistent. Like athletes feed off of consistent energy, versus, when you're winning, you're excited. When you're losing, you're kind of down. They don't require that. And I think over time we just understood how to layer into the culture and with a bit of an unwavering approach to prioritizing the individual within the team setting. I think trust was established in a lot of ways. And again, I'm not with the team anymore, but you could probably interview every person in that organization and they'd give a pretty similar feedback to Rick and the staff that they currently have, as well as the culture, like as a whole.
A more technical point, basketball poses a unique set of problems for a few reasons. When none of them maybe more important than just the size of human being you tend to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in a few soccer locker rooms before, and they're not usually the tallest people on the planet, or don't
No.
have to be. By like, I forget how little Messi is, but he's little enough for me to say how little and not how big Messi is. He's very small. What was what maybe threw you for a ride in even just like walking into a weight room? I remember walking into the weight room the first day I trained Shaquille O'Neal and getting up on a box and trying to figure out what is the world like at 7'3". What was like? What were technically some of the problems posed by just dealing with I mean, KD, you got a 7-footer right there. What was that like for you coming out of a soccer background?
Well, the funniest thing is, if you work in pro sport, you live with the team, right? Like you're with them all the time. And when I left, the first thing I noticed is like I didn't have to look up to talk to everybody. And I'm like 5'9" on a good day. So I'm like, oh, like I'm actually kind of right in the middle. I'm right in the median. But for a long time, every person I just look up to. And not even joking, I used to like when I had to have real conversations once in a while to like lighten the mood, I might get on a box so I can look at them in the eye. But yeah, that was yeah, I didn't realize I'm trying to say the right thing. Yeah. It was an eye opener. Like so for 4 years I was really just one of the smallest people in the room. And I just got used to it. In terms of you're talking more like around programming and things like that.
Programming, injury management. I know hoopers are like ankles, knees, and low backs. Like it has to be
Yeah.
such a stark contrast to the structure function relationship of a soccer player.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have like I'll never say I, I I just said never. I don't like absolutes in terms of like you have to do this exercise or you can never do this exercise. When I came into the environment, there was an understanding. There was some guys who went to football schools where they had the clean squat bench, and they were 6'8", 6'9", so they wanted nothing to do with the barbell. They wanted nothing to do with Olympic lifts. And when you have 2 to 3 touch points a week, and somebody, one, they're not technically proficient because they're so long, it's challenging for them to get under a bar. Two, they don't like it. Three, you're trying to establish a culture where they can be successful. Maybe we won't do hang cleans. It doesn't mean I don't like them. It just means that that's kind of a harder thing to battle. And you're one bad catch and a sore wrist away from losing the entire weight room. So again, might listen to this and be like, "Oh, he doesn't like cleans." It's not that I don't like cleans. It's just it wasn't a priority for the aforementioned reasons, right? Yeah, it is different where you're not getting 2 to 3 hamstring strains a year like you did in soccer. It is very much like uh, ankle, Achilles, knee, kind of hip, low back. The odd shoulder if a player is getting extended, but in general, um, following the concept of little bits often with these guys goes much further along than getting to a point where they're super sore and they don't want to come back into the weight room. And I can give you one example of that. Not so much with the team, but through the osmosis of the league. I had a scenario where a colleague was telling me he just did like 2 sets of 3. I'm not even joking. He did 2 sets of 3 or 2 sets of 5 kettlebell swings with an athlete um, prior to a game. So he hadn't exposed him to a kettlebell swing prior. He was trying to do a light potentiation. One, the athlete didn't perform well, and two, the athlete's hamstrings were sore the next day, and the athlete was livid. Right. So as a strength coach, you're like, how are you sore from that? But that's not the point. The point is you added a new exposure prior to competition that the athlete wasn't, comfortable with or exposed to. And then there's the thing that, causal versus correlated versus, in their own mind, didn't perform well, then he's sore. He's just lost that athlete. Right. And so I'm going on this tangent where you're asking me, like, look at their bodies. How do you pivot? It's more, we really were really, really purposeful to, if we're going to try a new exercise, try a new exposure, always do it when we have ample time between actually needing to perform in case they don't respond well. And those type of stimulus would be very slow and steady, where you probably wouldn't get any true physiological response for a while because you're just not loading the tissue enough. Um, and beyond that, we'd really try to follow the concept of little bits often. So, yeah, you're not going to build a ton of muscle doing 3 to 4, 15 to 20 minute sessions a week, but you're going to build up confidence in that for that athlete in the weight room. You can probably get proficient at 3 or 4 things over that period, so that when you do have a low game window, or perhaps a rest window, or an athlete needs to come back from an injury, then it's time that you've built up enough capacity for whatever that exercise or um, that that focus is, where you can actually hit it properly. I don't know if I don't think I made
Yeah.
sense that last piece, but it's really I just went on this big tangent and I lost my train of thought halfway through. But dude, until you're looking at somebody who's 6'10" in the eye, and you're like, okay, how do I, not mess up this superhuman um, from performing at the highest level and moving and getting up and down the court. It's hard to say, you have to do this type of exercise, or, we need to load for 45 minutes 3 days a week so that we can maintain certain components. It's very much like small team. How can we connect with this athlete and just start chopping wood?
Yeah, I guess moving on from that, you picked an interesting 10 plus years to get into strength and conditioning. Is like, I think the industry is obviously popularized in a lot of ways. And with that popularity has come a large influx of tech. And it's something that I find myself fighting against a lot, is the data side, whether it's in consulting, whether I'm even now dealing with athletes. The numbers are maybe pulling away from the subjective interpretation. And with a sport like basketball, where you have one of the more rigorous sports with one of the more rigorous schedules, how is your relationship as a strength coach to data changed over the years, and where do you kind of stand with metrics and tracking and in season? What do you find valuable? What do you find Is this a touch point? We could pull it.
No, no, I mean it's where do I stand? I mean, I'm still really interested on the tech side. But the reason why is I think it could, in the right setting, provide tremendous value for buy-in, for biofeed, not for biofeedback, but for buy-in and for, scaling a process. And I'm not talking about like scaling an app or something like that, but you know, you are you, right? Jordan, like you have an incredible eye, you know what you know, you can sit in a room and coach anybody, right? But if you have to manage 15, 20, 30 athletes, how can you use technology to carry over your expertise or your process, so that there is some continuity? That's one. Two, um, sports can be emotional, right? And so when there is technology and when there is objective information, it provides tremendous value, in situations, one where, whether you're right or you're wrong, in situations where there's finger pointing, where you're trying to understand why an athlete may not be performing one way or another, why an athlete got hurt. So retroactive evaluations. Um, and then, there's the other piece. Some athletes are, they're also becoming increasingly analytical, right? So understanding why they're using data, why, jump data, force velocity profiling, all that, like it is valuable for certain types of athletes. Now, I'm going to say all that and I think we're going to be aligned. Like people are putting the cart before the horse, and they're not focusing enough on their eye on the interpersonal connection with the athlete, with the individual, on understanding how to coach, how to cue, and they're more focused on the data because it's sexy and it's where things are trending. So before all technology, before all data, like if you can't coach, if you can't be in a room and make a lot of your decisions without that information, you're probably not a great coach, or you're just not focusing on the right things. And so that's fundamentally there. I see value in tech, having been in the roles that I'm in, but I've also seen, unfortunately, a lot of professionals that are unbelievable with the tech, but then you try to get them on the coaching floor and they don't know how to demonstrate, they don't know how to get under a bar, they don't know how to connect with athletes, and all they want to do is stare at their iPad. So there's a sequence of things, right? um, the delayed gratification has to come. Can you coach without it? Are you really, really good at working with an individual athlete? Do you understand your shit? Are you well read? And then go to technology versus the opposite, where it's like I'm just going to use this number to try to get a better output, and then I'm not going to focus on my own skills as a coach.
Now, have you ever had issues? Because I know am when I am propositioned to provide data, it's usually by someone who doesn't understand
It.
but let alone what I do at large. Like, it's a head coach coming to me who doesn't know the difference between his elbow and his ear hole, and he wants me to provide him with some data without maybe even a framework to interpret. So one step further removed than the coach who maybe knows all about the data and no coaching, or the coach who knows all about the coaching and no data. A lot of times this data is being passed down, into a succession of people who, as you move away from the athlete, understand less and less, and they're really just looking for something that trends against wins and losses.
Yes.
How have you navigated the communication side? Because when I think of coaches who have transitioned into positions at NCAA or pro sports, I feel as if I'm always posed with the question of like, dude, how do you communicate this with the rest of the organization?
Mm.
We grow up in this stovepipe of people who speak our language. We deal with athletes, and then all of a sudden, there's a grizzled general manager that's like coming into the weight room. You're like, this can't be good.
No.
And yeah, you have to have that conversation. What has that been like at your different levels,
Yeah.
throughout
No,
your
that's
career?
such a good question. So firstly, like obviously, if you're in a tough relationship with somebody of power who's asking for information, um, you have to decide how you want to deal with that. I can tell you this with good certainty: collecting information is very different than sharing or using it, right? Because it can be insightful. In many of my environments, like with the caps, like some of our reports used to have four variables on it. Like so, we're collecting 20 or 30, but we validated a core piece, and they all tell a bit of a story. So if we're wearing GPS, it might be literally like a volume load, a perceived intensity load, one subjective metric and one other piece. But attached to that PDF is 3 to 4 bullet points. With our goal is the person who's asking for the information just wants to see the bullet points. Um, that is a way, I can tell you, I know firsthand there's a really top rugby club in Europe, and the sports science group, they probably put in, $500,000 a year on these couple people, and they have this 12-page report that's going out to the coaching staff, and I can tell the coaching staff are getting it and they're pressing delete because it's overwhelming. And they want to, they feel like they need to, but they don't actually understand it, so they don't see value in it. Where to your point is like some people may ask for it. It is our job. If you're going to collect it, you have to be able to explain it to a second grader. And not to say the managers are second graders, but you have to be able to synthesize it. And our job, if you are going to use it, is to be able to be that insights creator, that 2 to 3 bullet points. And if it doesn't matter, get it out of that. Gotta get it out of there. Like, don't use it. That's the biggest takeaway for me.
Now, coming out on the other side of, ascending the ranks of institutionalized pro sports, and now sort of going full circle back to now it's not a 65-year-old dentist. Now it's one of the most prolific athletes on the planet. What is the feeling of switching roles now from, a team effort where there's a responsibility for the entirety of the players, there's a responsibility and accountability to your fellow staff members. There's a team aspect, which I would imagine, which would have been so fun in the time and place where you were coaching, to step out for work the day after and be like, I only have
Yeah.
to worry
Oh,
about one person now.
well, it took me a while. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, pro sport. I mean, my first year, I think we had 52 flights. I was away 151 days. It's a grind, but I mean, they take care of us here too. We fly well, we eat well, we travel well. But it was a bit of not so much in the summer because the summers were busy, but it was a bit of a shock. I had been in team sport for 10 years, so you know, anywhere between 8 and 11.5 months, I was around a group of people, right? So that was definitely a bit of a shock. And off the get-go, when you're used to kind of moving at a certain pattern, and you're like, okay, I only have to focus on, and yeah, I know you work with individuals privately as well. You come in, you're like, I can do so much now. I have one focus. But the reality is you can overwhelm people if you come in and you try to reinvent the wheel and apply, energy that goes into 20 people into one person. And so, um, yeah, my mind was racing. I was like, oh, we can implement X, Y, Z. But the reality is you just have to come back to what does that one individual need, and don't put, you know, I was telling myself like, don't put, your expectations or your kind of rhythm of work, and just try to fit it into a bucket that doesn't make sense. So I had to took me about 6 months, 3 months after season to press reset and just recognize, okay, it's a different energy, it's a different expectation. So how do you maximize this opportunity given, that your last 10 years was very different? And a lot of it is doing less, but like doing less as not like, hey, I'm going to kick my feet up and watch TV. It's like doing less is recognizing that you may have ideas, you may want to implement more, but it's only because you have more time to think, to read, to educate yourself on how to squeeze the lemon. And so it's a great question because not many people have asked me that, and it took me a very long time to take a breath and reset how I was going to approach one athlete when I've been working with multiple for a long time.
You know what? I've had similar tones of conversation with friends of mine that have been released from prison. it's like the similar sort of like, I could do anything now. It's like, that's overwhelming, dude. Maybe you want to go back inside. Like
Yeah.
it is. I mean, luckily for you, it seems as if with the people you had around and the place and the players that it was a good experience. But I wonder if you hadn't maybe felt that before. You talked about the transition into from working with Golden State to just Steph solely. Reevaluating the energy, seeing that you're going to be in a different place. You guys, what year? Because you said you came on after they won three.
Yeah, so we came in 2019. So our first year was when we lost to Toronto in the finals. And so we had a really good team, aging team, but really good team. I shouldn't say aging team, aging team. Um, they had been in the finals 4 years in a row. They won three or four. Then we went to the finals, so that was their fifth final. So they really hadn't had much of an off season. Then the next year, Draymond was hurt. We had a roster flip, or not Draymond, sorry, Klay Thompson did his ACL the year prior. We were the worst team in the NBA. Steph broke his hand game three. One of the biggest players in the league fell on his hand, and that was that. We were worst team in the league. It was a very different environment than what it was the year prior. COVID hit, long off season. Our third year, we were good. Like we competed, we were fit. It was actually a lot of fun given a COVID year, but we didn't get out of the play-in, even though we had played really hard. And then the last year, we went to the finals. We beat Boston, and that was it for me.
So that's 2022, if memory serves.
Yes, sir.
What Talk me through that, because I think there's a guaranteed 82 game spread where you're like, all right, these are our, like you mentioned earlier, here are our times of maybe a slower game pace, maybe around an all-star break or around a holiday. How does periodization lend itself to coaching as you transition deeper and deeper into the playoffs? And what is, like, are you walking on eggshells? How do you keep it
No,
together?
no.
You talked about consistent energy. Like,
Yeah, no, I can tell you this, like our team loaded right through until game six of the finals. Like we didn't know. Like it's a bit of you're right because even going into the playoffs, like if you watch playoffs now, um, the intensity is just so different. It's so fast, right? And series vary, but there's this thought process of like really tapering going into playoffs where I think you need to consider what does the athlete need to be exposed to, and are you making sure that those type of exposures are at least being addressed a couple times prior to going into it? So a couple of thoughts we had going into it was, if an athlete during the regular season is playing 32 minutes a game, but in playoffs they're going to play 36, 37, should we try to get games where they're playing 36, 37, um, in the regular season to get used to that volume? And then you can also, help them on the front end and the back end so it's not a risk, right? Um, are we hitting peak velocities going into camp or going into playoffs at all so that the guys have been exposed to sprinting, like sprinting. I mean, it's not sprinting because the court's so small, but close to sprinting, right? So it was making sure that the players are being exposed to what they will be exposed to as much as we can, but also finding windows that they can recover from it. That was one. Again, the concept of little bits often worked well. The core guys who were committed really, and our team lifted together because our leadership lifted, so the rest of the guys lifted. We were lucky with that. But there was not a window over, I think, a 12-month period that our leader didn't, get a decent stimulus, every 3 days. It just didn't happen, except for 2 weeks that were planned complete deloads, 2 or 3 weeks. And so game after game four, loading. Volume's low, maybe take out some of the eccentric phase work. So we're still working on, good output, but without the residual fatigue. But we were going and we went. And that was something that was purposeful and something that we had a lot of pride in because we'd built up a lot of capacity, built up the engine over time, slowly but surely.
do you feel as if having a veteran leadership core that was bought into lifting made that conversation
It,
not even a
it,
conversation?
100%. Yeah, Draymond had a cool podcast. I think it was on his own where he talks about that. He's like, I walk in the room, Steph's there. I walk out of the room, Steph's there. And if he's lifting, I'm lifting. And if I'm lifting, and he talks about that, but it's just quiet leadership. And like, it's in any environment, right? If the top guy or the guys who are meant to be driving leadership aren't committed to you or your staff, you're kind of hooped. Like, and it's not about, just catering to that person. It's about having leadership understand why you're there for them versus, not for them like as an individual, but why you're there for the team and the culture and what your purpose is. Versus at times, and I've been guilty of this at times, is like I just want him to be good in the weight room because I'm a weight room guy. Like I'm not going to go out and start talking about basketball like I'm a basketball connoisseur. I'm always going to preface like you're the basketball person, but tell me, how can what do you think we can do? Like how do you think we need to approach your process? Like build it with them versus being like I'm 10 years in the league, you're doing this. Like that doesn't service anybody anymore, especially with the way young athletes are now. Like they want to own their process. They want to be engaged. They're trying to educate themselves. Like building it together is a way to, you know, commit to each other, commit to the process together and have them have ownership in it, which in turn will help with compliance and consistency.
As you guys transition in new players, and maybe this is probably a universal question off sport, but I find it really interesting the contrast between soccer and basketball. One of the key things that comes to mind to me when I think about those two sports, just topologically, like I don't even think about it, not even anything about the schedules or anything. I think those two sports are the exact contrast or exactly contrasted from the point of soccer is oftentimes described as a weak man game, and not like weak like they're small, um, where basketball is often described as a strong man game or a strong link and weak link game is probably a better way to describe it, where a soccer team is only as good as their worst player. A poor defender that's easily picked apart, good offenses will target that defender and they'll score and win games, where basketball seems to be on the exact flip side of that. And really, I think every other major sport would exist on a spectrum between those 2 points of like, hey, okay, strong link game, basketball. If you have a solid core, you will have a good team. Now, when you transition in new players, as you guys acquire new people in the offseason or smaller pieces of your leadership tend to leave, how sensitive is a weight room at that level to personnel changes, if you will, personnel being players in this case?
Ooh, well, it, again, I think it comes back to our earlier conversation. Is the leadership is the core group that's driving the weight room culture intact? And if it's not, if it's press reset, then it all depends on who's coming in. But um, again, I think being unwavering, being consistent, and having your processes known, um, and then organizationally, people understanding how things flow like that helps to create some resistance. But there has been scenarios, not I'm not talking about the wars specifically, but where somebody comes in who is definitely adverse to our processes, and that can be challenging, especially if they're good players. But in that same scenario that I'm referring to, I've seen that person who was meant to be a leader basically get drowned out because the rest of the core was committed to the process. So it can be super sensitive, and I think it's important that anytime somebody new comes in, that whether they're your 15th roster player or a top player, that they get up to speed right away, and they recognize what your intentions are with them to help them be their best, to help the team win. For everybody to follow the process of Kaizen, little chip away slowly, make little improvements on a regular basis, and make them understand whether it's different than what another group's doing. It's your gym, your weight room's culture and approach to helping every athlete, regardless of where they are on there. So um, it is definitely sensitive, especially when you bring in, depending on who you're bringing in or who you're losing. But those really deliberate efforts to make sure when people come in that they're feeling taken care of, and that they're part of the process is one of the key drivers there.
I think a really selfish question, as I'm the stepmom in a lot of situations. Like I get called into weight rooms with an individual player in teams that I have no affiliation with, but the player holds
Yeah,
a decent amount of weight. I've treated players obviously at their homes. I've treated one player. He bought a Mercedes Sprinter van and turned it into a treatment room because the team would not allow any outside people into the stadium. Which, like, fair play, man. Like, I'm not here to step on any toes. How have you found? Because I feel like basketball really pioneered a lot of the, in my case, I would refer to it maybe as like the concierge model, or the, you're this guy's guy in the case of, you and Steph. How has that transition been when you're so directly involved in a player that's so directly involved? Like, obviously you see it from the other side, the staff, the organization. Did you ever have to deal with it on the other end as someone who was, overseeing performance,
yes.
as you were a strength coach, and you got some outside actor? How has that transition been? How has the information you've received from being within the organization helped you transition into this complementary role, individual to one person? And then have you ever had issues, as it sounds like you have, the strength coach going like, hold on, we got a system and a team here. Who's Jerry? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, yeah. Who's Jerry? Jerry Ramagita. Yeah. So it comes back earlier to culture. So culturally, again, Coach Kerr, Bob Myers, our core team, like fundamentally, there's been some pretty strict rules on externals coming in, and that's always been our impression too, because at times it can really impact the credibility or the nuance of the team, of the culture. Um, but that being said, anytime we've had an athlete who wants to work or is working with somebody, we've always gone so outside of our way to make sure we are united, because the one thing you cannot have is an athlete being torn between the staff um, and the outside practitioner. And that's where it can be honestly cancerous, where the outside practitioners, talking shit about the staff's, not connecting with the outside practitioner, and the athletes, hearing it from both sides, and creates this distrust, and then the athletes start talking to other athletes, and egos get in the way, and it's just a net loss for absolutely everybody. And that just serves no purpose at the end of the day, whether you're an outsider or you're there. Our jobs are to help that athlete succeed. We all eat if that athlete has success. And so that's always needs to be a reminder. So to your question, is when we were there, if there was somebody, all to them, like, we're not going to try to convince them to just focus with us. We're going to support them as much as we can, but there's rules that the organization holds in terms of entry points. But we would always go above and beyond, and athletes would leave it summer. I had relationships with almost every strength coach, therapist that those athletes worked with, if they wanted us to, or if they were open to it. Um, because I had such a strong, quite honestly, like, because I had such a strong understanding of the need to keep the group relatively united when I left, um, I've not gone to the facility. I have a really good relationship with the whole staff. I only know 5 players, like the rest of them have 5 or 6 players. The rest of them have all gone. But like I really try to be as respectful as I can to let them kind of do their process, and then when it's our time, it's our time. Um, Now, if there was a scenario that it made sense to be integrated, I may, or I would, but I would definitely have a conversation with the leaders there first to make sure it aligned. It aligned. So that's a touchy subject. It's a really common problem, and you as an outside practitioner, you have your the way you do things, and don't let the tattoo scare you. You're probably like a really nice guy, and um, but if a team's not willing to work or collaborate with you, that's a team issue. Especially if you're willing to collaborate, and I don't see why you wouldn't. And vice versa, there are outsiders who are just out of principle, just bring the team down, and the team is willing to connect, and I think the best way to deal with it is to have the athlete recognize that you're making your efforts, and if they're not willing to do that, that's their perspective, and then they can deal with the team as they want, and vice versa, right? Like if there was an outsider and the athlete really connected with them, and when I was with the team, they weren't really keen to connect, I would probably have that conversation with an athlete and say, listen, it's not my prerogative. You do what you want to do. We're trying very hard to connect with them. They don't want to. And so if they're interested in doing more, please let me know. Otherwise, I can't do anything else without information. And
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah. Have you thought, seeing the whole spectrum, like you've gone through, you're on the other side of the board in 11 years, which is like, dude, that's a blazing pace of a career. Like you should go to law school or something after this. Like I think you're kind of done, right? Like you bought Park Place, ran the monopoly board on the career. Have you ever thought about going back into the team environment? I know a lot of guys when they get out, you talked about the rigor of the travel schedule. Obviously I have
Yeah.
friends across various sports, most of them mutual, whether it's hockey, whether it's football, whether it's basketball, whether it's baseball, and they get out and it's like they wake up from a fever dream. Like, what was I doing for like so many
Yeah. Yeah.
years?
Yeah. 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 Uh, I mean, is it a great job? Is it one of the greatest jobs? Like, it's amazing. Don't, I'm not going to sit here and say it's not. You get your dopamine. You're engaged, you're around people, there's so many positives. Right now, I have three kids. I have a 1 year old, my daughter just turned one, my boy's turning four next week, and my daughter's turning seven in June. And like, my wife has been with me this whole time, and she's, been a rock. So for me, my only priority aside from, the amazing job opportunity I have now, is my family and my kids. And if there's young strength coaches who, or coaches that want to get into pro sport, there is a balance. And it's very hard to achieve. And you have to recognize like you have to compromise something on either end. And you have to really think about, where you want to go and how you want to go about it. I would not change a single thing ever. And I'm in a great position right now. I'm pretty much as fortunate as you can ask for in terms of transitioning from pro to private. So, when my kids are older, of course, or if there was a role that aligned with, with a schedule and what I'm doing with Steph, I'd definitely, be open to it because I love it. But right now, it's all about family and creating a bit more balance in what I'm doing.
Legend. Now, if you look back on your a career so far, I mean, the championship has to jump off the page, at least from an outsider's perspective. Do you have like, maybe a top three like moments? Because I find myself when I ask this question and I think back on myself, it's not usually what an outsider might think. If you were to look back, the entirety of your career so far and think, the three highlights of my career are one, two, and three. What would that list contain?
Of my whole career?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, the championship, of course, because that was, oh my goodness.
Because how does anything else make the list? I think an outsider would look at that and go,
No,
you guys got the ski
I
goggles
know.
on, the champagne is going insane. Like,
Yeah. I mean that's there, but there's other like there's moments, and I have to think more about that, but there's moments where you just connect with the people that been in a foxhole with, and you have success. Um, honestly, like there's probably a couple conversations that I had with um, key people that were really impactful in changing my life that weren't specific to athletes, but like maybe with Rick. Um, Obviously, the championship was one. Um, I'm really trying to. I got to think through this a little bit more. That's a big question. I can't even answer that. I got to think about that. I'm sorry, man. That
well, we'll
there's
have to
too
get
many.
you.
There's too many mo. There's
Yeah.
too many. I'll come back. We'll do another one. We'll do a follow up
Yeah, no,
because
for sure. We'll have to
I
do the next one in person.
yeah. I think. Sorry, I can give you another moment. When I first started at the private gym, I ran a hockey program, And there's a couple athletes that I worked with, 13, 14 years old. Jansen Harkins is one of them. When he had his first like NHL season, that was really cool for me. And there's a couple, I mean, there's some kids who are coming up right now who I've known for a very long time, and they're just really good people. They've always put their head down, and now they're having a lot of success. I'm not saying it has anything to do with me, but being able to be a part of that journey, that's like one of the coolest things ever. That you're involved with helping somebody achieve their dreams. Like that's where working with young athletes has such a positive impact, right? Because you're with them, you're connected. You're connected. You're a team together. You're striving for something that doesn't currently exist. Versus sometimes athletes that are already at the pro rank.
Yeah, I mean, I think the NHL draft this year might be a moving one for you, as we can all anticipate who's going first
Oh,
overall. That's got to be because you would have been around. Geez, that kid probably wasn't even at knee height when you first met him, if born at all.
yeah, that'll be a fun one.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I now have
well,
that whole family.
it
Amazing, amazing people, man.
couldn't happen to better, yeah, to better people. Well, anyways,
Yeah,
man, I think
I
as
agree.
mentioned, we'll run it back. We'll have to run it back in person, and we'll lead off the top of the next hour with it, maybe a more thought out version of the pretty heavy question to end it on. But I
Yeah,
appreciate your time, man. I know you're a busy guy, and anyone who watches sports knows you're a busy guy. So I appreciate you carving out some time to chat, man. I really appreciate it.
of course. Say less. I mean, I appreciate it, and I feel like we just started. So if let's run it back and let's get more questions. Keep it
Yeah, no,
moving.
for sure. I think in the off season I'm gonna have to make a trip out west, and we'll do it. We'll do it right.
Beautiful. Let's get it. All right, Jordan.
Awesome,
Appreciate
man.
it.
Thank you
Take
so
care,
much.
bud.